All right. Okay. That's my beautiful daughter there, Viola. She's been really good. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I know there's a lot of competition in terms of great material out there during the conference, so I appreciate your time here, and I appreciate the folks that's also on, I guess, on the interwebs watching this as well. So, also want to thank the festival organizers, Ariana Ciccone and Christopher Potter. I think they put together an amazing conference, and I just want to bid an ode. So I think they've put together, curated an amazing conference, and I love the vibe of the conference. So I'm going to show a lot of examples this afternoon. You don't have to write it down. I'm going to have a URL at the end of the presentation that will just basically capture everything I've showed and kind of do a report. And also, I'll send it over to my Twitter as well. So there'll be a back channel at the same time. Just I think it might be helpful to kind of give a little bit of context where I used to work, where I came from. So my mini bio is basically that I worked for a number of newspapers in the U.S. early in my career, the Contra Costa Times, Chicago Tribune, Knight Ridder. I also worked for a number of academic institutions, including the Poynter Institute and also San Francisco State University. In between there, I also launched a company called DeVigal Design that did a lot of interactive work. And at San Francisco State, I also launched a website called interactivenarratives.org, which unfortunately right now is an old defunct, but I do have a Tumblr post that allows me to do that. So then in 2006, the New York Times called, and that's when I joined and led a team of multimedia journalists, from developers to multimedia storytellers. I was really proud of the team I curated and put together that produced award-winning work, and also helped evolve the news story forms that's being used today, that's continued to be used today. Maybe my back channel isn't working. Okay, so here's when sort of nitty gritty. When I left the New York Times in the fall of 2012, I actually wrote a blog post about the media ecosystems that deepens engagement, and especially in service to journalism. So although I enjoyed a career in journalism and multimedia, that's where been a lot of my focus, and how we innovated how we told stories. I think my adjacent possible at the time was not just how to explore and how audiences interact with journalism, but rather, because of journalism, how we interact with each other. So I think that's in many ways more important. So I was intrigued by this media ecosystem where the top-down traditional news media is on one side, and also the unfiltered social web is in another. And what does that ecosystem look like when we're all intermixed? So I had a small stint at an interactive studio in Portland called Second Story, but I soon found my recalling, as I call it, back to academia. So since July of last year, I'm a professor of practice at the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. Sorry, my bad. So at that time, I became the chair of journalism innovation and civic engagement, and I was intrigued by that definition of that title, because whenever people think about innovation, I think it's automatic, or people tend to think of innovation as being technical. I'm a little bit more concerned that it isn't, because I feel like historically when we think about innovation, especially in technical innovation, they're technology that's supposed to bring us closer together, but in retrospect, they actually are separating us, right? You know, from the automobile, where we're sent away from the city centers, from computers to mobile phones to Twitter, where we're constantly not plugged in and not being present. So I'm more intrigued about how do we create a technology that's as opposed to a technology that's eroding the environment where innovation and also democracy can really thrive. So I truly believe journalism is inextricably linked to the health of our democracy. So in ancient times, there was a place where that democracy can happen. There was a centralized place, right? Where people can meet, can present new information, and exchange and perhaps find the solutions within that community needs. And that place in ancient Greece was that gathering place, was called the Agora Journalism Center. So that's why last year, the School of Journalism at the University of Oregon, the School of Journalism and Communication, created a new center. That is the gathering place of innovation in communication and civic engagement. So in one of the projects that we put together, it was really in the hopes that we can really evolve the definitions of journalism. So in preparation, in fact, I'll have to admit that this presentation is a reboot from one that I had last week, because we actually had a conference in Portland called "What is Journalism?" So we asked that very question: what is journalism? And so in preparation for that presentation, we actually launched a campaign 2 months ago. So you might say that this presentation was 2 months in the making. And so we very much asked, what is the future of journalism? And whenever we ask that, and you might want to ask that yourself in thinking about the future of journalism, oftentimes I think people answer that by looking at the paradigms of the past to try to fix what was happening in the past, as opposed to truly looking at what's happening or what could happen and what's possible in the future. So this campaign, the This is Journalism campaign, was to truly illuminate emerging forms of journalism in unexpected places. So a little bit of a background too. So we launched it in February of 2015, this year. We've had over 130 tweets since then. And they've been posting more towards projects, more towards websites, and perhaps even articles that kind of talk about some of the new evolving forms. Over 45 contributors so far, so we're going to keep it open, obviously, and hopefully we can grow that contribution as well as the number of tweets. So we use the traditional definitions of journalism as the prism through which we viewed the examples that we're going to kind of share with you today. And some of the examples that were curated and collected on the What is Journalism social campaign. And as you can see from the American Press Institute's report on journalism essentials, journalism is the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. It is also the product of these activities. Furthermore, history reveals that more democratic a society, the more news and information it tends to have. The purpose of journalism is thus to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. So to me, that's the last statement is really powerful to me, in the sense that if we can kind of stick with that framework, the possibilities of new forms of journalism can be extremely exciting. So, we accepted these definitions and principles and elements of journalism, and then presented these emerging examples that fit them. So we have an early report. Okay, so as you saw, there was a website that we can point to. It was collecting the social tweets with the hashtag This is Journalism, both on Twitter, also on Instagram. And again, we have had a number of contributions. And as a way to identify them, we ended up putting together patterns that we recognize, as well as some observations from this collection. And we presented this, again, last week at the closing plenary for our What is Journalism conference. So here's some early trends that we were looking at. Of course, there's the new formats, right? In many of these cases, the old is the new again, right? Satirical shows like The Daily Show in the US and the Colbert Report have all long been argued as the source of news for the younger people, for the younger set. And as Khalid said yesterday, satire is an extreme form of truth, right? And you can kind of notice how comedy's sleeper effect certainly has that retention power to make impact within people, not just their memory, but also in how they would react to that set of news. When we think about other news sets of formats, you know, again, I'm excited by the old and its new form. Others have pointed to projects on our campaign that recently pushed the more traditional forms. So audio podcasts or audio storytelling. There's a great podcast from This American Life called Serial. If you haven't listened to it, it's basically a serialized podcast that really captures an opportunity to basically binge listen to an amazing story. Also, somebody else pointed on the campaign other forms of documentary film, right? I mean, the Jinx in some ways isn't necessarily new, but it helps help redefine what we look at in terms of truth and truth to power. Other forms of new platforms. There was one contribution from Professor Wes Pope that said, you know, this is journalism because it makes a world smaller and a better place, one photo at a time. And he was talking about a campaign called Everyday Africa. And I think it's been healthy conversations throughout this conference and inquiries about new emerging platforms, right? As Mario Calabresi noted, that publishers will no longer distribute their content exclusively on platforms and channels that they own. And as Jigar Mehta from AJ Plus also discussed yesterday, that their website, AJ Plus, is only a place to point to the social platforms that they distribute their content on, right? They push it on Facebook, they push it on Twitter, wherever they can. So Everyday Africa distributes both on Instagram, Tumblr, and also on Facebook. So other forms of platforms that really are engaging and in some ways exclusive. You know, Jersey Shore Hurricane News is exclusively on Facebook, and it's really trying to create a community around their news of the Jersey Shore, especially after Hurricane Sandy. And also, reportedly, which is a group of journalists, is exclusively, right now at least, publishing on Medium, right? The new publishing platform of Medium that was co-founded or founded by one of the founders of Twitter. So really exciting work being done and also distributed on multiple platforms. There's also opportunities, obviously, when legacy media can also publish on other platforms in collaboration. So a great example of that is BBC's collaboration with WhatsApp, where in terms of Damien Radcliffe's tweet, he identifies that this is journalism because BBC and WhatsApp are using mobile to enhance public knowledge with vital life-saving information. So that's the new platforms. Another trend that we looked at in this campaign was looking at the new front page, right? So Catherine T-Rex on Twitter identified this particular tweet, right, and said that this is journalism because news isn't news if no one sees it. The creative and offbeat ways journalists are using Snapchat. So what she actually pointed to was a story that happened that really captured how Snapchat is becoming young people's sets in terms of their front page, right? So when you think about what your source of a front page is, what do you usually think about? What do you usually go to? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it Reddit? I mean, Reddit's supposed to be the homepage of the internet. I think for some people, when I ask them, they do say Reddit is their homepage for not just the internet, but also for news. And also with Snapchat's new Discovery channels presents videos, music, articles from major media companies that are partnered to blast out bite-sized news. So Bitesize is very reminiscent, right, in some ways, in terms of thinking about the ways people can consume these kind of content to the younger mobile audiences. So when I'm also thinking about other ways of new front pages, I think about the equivalent of the front page of the 24-hour broadcast channel, right? For anybody who's been have used Periscope, So there's a tweet by one of my J students, Ashley Stephanie, who tweeted, this is journalism because the way Periscope live streams video via mobile takes citizen journalism to new heights. So it's really interesting, right? When you think about how Periscope as a live broadcast channel can really disrupt certain paradigms. So, think about, the television production truck outside. All of that is in your pocket, right? Being able to distribute that content, whatever you're seeing, out to the world, again, across your other mobile phones. So, obviously the quality is not there. Obviously the lighting situations, there's a lot more going on, but the technology has really shrunk down to something as small as this mobile phone. So besides the new platforms and the new front page, we also identified a trend within the This is Journalism campaign to think about the new bulletin board, right? The physical bulletin board, meant for public messages, providing information, announcing events, or advertising items wanted or for sale, continues to thrive in many local communities. A digital experiences enhances that engagement. In fact, in 1995, Craigslist, I think, remains to be the godfather of classified advertisements on the web, right? So when you're thinking about, I'm sure I can read some people's minds thinking, a bulletin board, that's not journalism. But let's bring it back to the American Press Institute's definition, right? Journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. So here's an example of /ClickFix, a website that Todd Milborn pointed out in the What is Journalism hashtag, saying that this is journalism because /ClickFix doesn't just identify problems, it provides a platform for solutions. Other new websites that's also happening in the US, looking at this sort of new bulletin board format, is one called Nextdoor. It's a private social network. Think of it as, a Craigslist, but it's private, where people can make announcements, they can exchange information, they can share news and concerns around their community. So the idea of it is to really create a community of neighbors and a community, right? And also there's another website called Front Porch Forum, which is ultimately helping neighbors connect with each other. So there's lots of interesting things happening within the format of that bulletin board. Another trend that we're looking at in the What is Journalism campaign is looking at the new investigator, right? So when we think about the individuals or groups of individuals with the will, the passion, and the intelligence to pursue where others won't or do not, that's what I would define as the new investigator, right? So in this hashtag, this is journalism because Bellingcat is investigating and analyzing open source information to report on news often ignored. So for folks who's not familiar with Bellingcat, it's basic. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Elliot Higgins. He was a British citizen journalist, blogger, and a founder of Bellingcat. And he has become a weapons analysis expert and leading the source of information on the conflict of Syria. In fact, C.J. Shivers of the New York Times identified him as a one-man news service and thanked Elliot for creating an opportunity for merging new and old forms of reporting into a fresh look at recent events. So, there's a great post. If you go to his Kickstarter campaign, in fact, he gives a big story about how he formed Bellingcat and how it started, and ultimately the kind of things that he was reimagining the opportunity to sort of engage with his audience as a blogger. It's also no surprise that Elliot is also a contributor to Storyful's Open Newsroom initiative. And they're a group of people breaking news openly and collaboratively. And then yet another example how the evolving definition of the investigative journalist. So again, I would encourage you guys to check out Storyful's Open Newsroom initiative as well. For folks who just walked in, I should just point out that at the end of this presentation, I also will have a single URL that will capture all of the resources that I'm mentioning as well. So, but you can take photos as well. I noticed that. That's cool. So another category that we also recognized, in addition, in terms of the what is journalism or this is journalism hashtag, is really this idea of taking action. And I know I can read in people's minds that when I say take action, that the word advocacy comes out, right? And it was only mentioned once at a panel that I attended yesterday. At one of the panels I attended yesterday, and referred to this new network called the Solutions Journalism Network. And between them and Yes Magazine, they've been on the forefront in advancing this dialogue by highlighting stories of people or organizations that are working towards solutions to social problems. So, in terms of Catherine's tweet again, she's identifying organizations and also tools that really redefines what journalism is with this tweet. This is journalism because readers want more. Story Act is an opportunity to take news consumers from reading articles to taking action. So, in our campaign, there was great opportunity to find those resources that allow or create opportunities to turn compassion into true action. So Catherine pointed out to Story Act, and Story Act is actually a new experimental tool. It's funded by the Knight Foundation, and it's designed to display relevant user actions with a text story, within a text story, and streamlining that process of getting involved and taking action. Another tweet from Holly Epstein-Ajovo, sorry if I butchered your name, Holly, also contributed into this ecosystem of the This is Journalism hashtag with her new startup called Kicker. And what Kicker does is that it makes current events accessible, engaging, and actionable. So what happens in Kicker is on article sites, you can actually see a button that says take action, and it scrolls down, and they've listed on the same page, but not necessarily integrated within the editorial content, certain actions that you can take that they've researched. And then finally, well, maybe not too finally, there's two more that I want to mention in terms of identifying trends that we noticed from the This is Journalism hashtag. Of course, you can't talk about the future of journalism without talking about data, right? Or even mentioning data visualization, which in many ways, I think remains to be an evolving form within established news organizations. So for example, the interactive, Damien Radcliffe again pointed to a project that was a collaboration between the Bay Citizen, which is a student organization in the Bay Area in California, US, and also with the Center for Investigative Reporting, with a website called the Interactive Accident Tracker, which informs bike users of any accidents that's happening. So, I won't ponder too much about a lot of data visualizations and data, because I think this conference is rich with that kind of data-driven storytelling. But I also just want to sort of point out that there are opportunities to find out more projects to figure out other forms of data-driven storytelling within journalism. So I also pointed out to there's one website called an agency actually in Portland, Oregon, called Periscope, who created their own interactive website looking at U.S. gun deaths in 2013 and also 2010. And then another company created another one, Pitch Interactive, created another one looking at drone attacks. And again, this was not established within news organizations, but something that they were collaborating with and kind of exploring on their own. They're somewhat their own sort of new investigator. And then the final trend that I want to identify in terms of looking at some of the topics that we recognize in the This is Journalism hashtag. This, Pierre Morel in yesterday's panel mentioned, rebuilding Haiti that they put together, and was published on Route 89 in France. And it was really a project thinking about rebuilding Haiti. And it helps understand the real building process. And with most news games, I would say that these interactives allow you to take individual roles as a player, and I say air quotes player, only because that's the only real definition of why it's considered a game. But I think news games has so significant values of actually presenting information, but also presenting an opportunity to understand where the user of that interactive is understanding the choices being made throughout the experience. Again, not trying to avoid the word game, because there's such a, at least in the US, there's such a stigma to the word games in the newsroom that it's really kind of thinking about interactive experiences. And also in many ways, interactive documentaries is in that same form, right? And in many ways, it's an opportunity to also find a way to build empathy because of that role-playing opportunity towards the characters of that story. So other examples of news games within the This Is Journalism hashtag comes from Canada's NFB Interactive, which created this one website called Fort McMoney. And it was an episodic approach. It was a way to understand the economy that's happening in a certain town, in an oil-driven town in Canada. And of course, someone also mentioned BBC's BBC News Syrian Journey, where they allowed people through text forms to understand some of the choices that the thousands of Syrian families had to face as they were in that process, in their journey. Of course, it got in a lot of slack, right? There was a lot of slack that came out of it in England, but I'm a true believer that I think these types of engagement tools and engagement interactives allow people to really understand those stories in a deeper level. You know, I often cite a quote that talks about either education. I think it was an Indian saying, but it always says, you know, it says, show me something, or tell me something I might forget. Show me something now will remember. Involve me and I will understand. And to me, that whole involve me and understand is what I would consider these news games are offering. It's an opportunity to get involved within that story. So, all right, so those are the trends. Again, I'll provide a link at the end so that it kind of recaps all that. But these are some of the examples and the categories that they fall in. But we also made the following observations. And when I say we, it's really the group of folks at the Agora Journalism Center, in thinking about how journalism of the future might differ from that of the past. And I think the operative word here is from these observations that there is going to be more collaboration, right? It's an example of community collaboration that is generating journalism is this one website called Milwaukeeans.org. It's an online neighborhood news service that pledges professional multimedia reporting on urban issues in 17 communities across Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the U.S. Other collaboration that's happening is also the Bristol Cable. It's a media cooperative created and owned by the people of the city. It was also another site that was submitted to the What is Journalism campaign, and it highlights the various perspectives for this collaboration. Another operative word for more journalism is also going to be more engaged and participatory. I think the old distributed model of journalism is inadequate for this interactive participation that people expect in this new digital and interconnected world. People are no longer satisfied to passively consume news, but rather, and the definition of journalism must become more expansive if it is to remain relevant. So a good example of that, in terms of that collaboration and that participation and engagement, is a Seattle Times collaboration with the Solutions Journalism, which resulted in this project called the Education Lab. And to me, it's also the Solutions Journalism plus community engagement equals true impact. Another example of more engaged and more participatory is BBC's News Pop-Up. The BBC created a mobile news bureau, BBC Pop-Up, that was created by a small team of reporters traveling across the United States. It was reporting to a new town each month, and nearly all the ideas that came out of this project were crowdsourced from local residents in the town they visited. So it's really extremely powerful. So one of the things I want to point out a little bit here is, when I think or when I talk about engagement and participatory, I don't think that necessarily, I think the word engagement is getting used quite often in various ways. And so the one thing I would really think about is that, to me, audience development is not the same as community engagement. I'll repeat that. Audience development is not the same as community engagement. So when I even think about the New York Times Innovation Report, and one of the big headline was a refocus on audience development. And when I think, when they're talking about it, and when a lot of people are talking about either audience development or engagement, they're thinking about clicks, right? They're thinking about likes, they're thinking about retweets. That could, that metric can form an idea, a sense of your audience, a sense of developing your audience. But it's not community engagement. It's not engaging with the public in a deeper way. So when I think about that, I think about this resource that a professor at Rutgers University by the name of Philip M. Napoli, and he has a report out that came out last year called Measuring Media Impact. And to me, it's a great overview of this field. He focuses mostly on documentary films rather than what we would consider as as legacy journalism. But I think in terms of media engagement, I think he has an enormous point. So in one of the slides that he has, he's looking at the media engagement continuum, right? There's a passive way to engage with the audience, and there's an active way to engage with the audience. So to me, the passive way, in some ways, is that audience development, is understanding, the Twitter followers, the Facebook likes, the getting page views, or getting screening to in the documentary sense, getting people to attend the screening. So it's a passive. There's no real activity that an individual or community members are actually doing. The more you get into the active sense, to me, is where the deeper engagement is happening. The more active they become, right? So user-generated content, we think about them as, we're also using the term citizen journalism. In some ways, citizen journalism is more passive, whereas participatory journalism is even far more active. So when I think about, when people are submitting content on the website, so what we call user-generated content, which isn't, the best term, because it seems the term user has always been something that bothered me. But also it's asking people to participate in events, participate in town hall meetings, participate in dialogue, in a face-to-face conversation. So I'm excited by what even The Guardian's doing in terms of creating a space with the public and media makers and journalists can actually really be in the same place. In some ways, it's the Agora Journalism Center, right? It's the gathering place for that ecosystem for news and the public. And then finally, the truly active in terms of engagement is really looking at how, opportunities for donating or opportunities to be involved within an organization and volunteering. So, yeah. So I just like to explore what that truly means, and when we think about engagement. So other takeaways and other observations from our This Is Journalism campaign is being more inclusive. And as this tweet said, this is journalism because Oakland Voices trains East Bay residents to tell the stories of their neighborhoods. Say Oakland Tribune is a mid-sized paper in the Bay Area in California, in the U.S. And what they've done in the newsroom is that this Oakland Tribune program actually trains residents to tell the stories of their neighborhoods. So it's a lot more capacity building within their community. So The Tribune says it created Oakland Voices as a vehicle for community members to become multimedia storytellers and to be new voices directly shaping the coverage of this region. Extremely powerful work. You know, another value, I think, in terms of looking at opportunities to engage with communities, to create and help create these stories, is that the resident stories that have corrected misrepresentations of their communities, and thus the coverage that they've generated with media makers and with journalists have become more accurate and more trustworthy. Another observation and another takeaway is that in the future of journalism, there's going to be more voices expressing themselves in more ways. So, an organization in the U.S. That I think is doing amazing work in this space is the Center for Investigative Reporting. Also now is rebranded themselves as Reveal, and but they've been among those demonstrating that stories can be told in many forms, including poetry slams and stage plays. So, for example, they have an off-page project. It's what they call an off-page project, where it's the intersection between youth voice and civic engagement, and they're working directly with the young people within their communities to enhance their reporting and work with journalists, and also to produce a media component that I think the community can truly understand. So, for example, in one project that they did, they really looked at the housing issues within a town called Richmond in California, and what they ended up producing was this rap video. Or in another town in Stockton, also in California, they created these poetry slams where they allowed the young people to tell their stories through poem. And they also are collaborating with a San Francisco-based theater company called Tides Theater with a project called Storyworks, and it explores the combination of live performances and journalism. So again, this idea of having more voices expressing themselves in more ways. Almost done in terms of observation. Another one is the idea of more context, right? So context has always been a vital part of the sense-making functions of journalism. Digital tools are being used like steroids for providing context to the news organizations, journalism students, interested citizens, and academic experts all contributing to this context. So a good example that Peggy Holman from Journalism That Matters tweeted in the This Is Journalism hashtag said, "This is journalism because get the gistery," which is gistery, explains what the news is and also where it is from. So other examples of getting more context is that was contributed to the This Is Journalism hashtag was one called Seattle in Progress. And Seattle in Progress is a mobile web app for seeing what's being built in Seattle, a town in Washington State. And it was developed by a single developer, a single programmer. And he had nothing to do with journalism, but he really wanted to engage with the developers and the programmers in this city, in Seattle. And he truly believes that the tech industry urgently needs to make housing for everyone a top priority. So he created this one project called Seattle in Progress, and it allowed people to deep dive and kind of record how the city was changing through new buildings being built, the delay of those new buildings, and to really kind of get an analysis that I think in some ways news organizations either don't have the resources or have a need to collaborate with developers like this guy who created Seattle in Progress. Another website that was submitted to the This Is Journalism campaign that provided more context was a website called The Conversation. And The Conversation is an independent source of news and views from the, get this, the academic and research community delivered directly to the public. In some place, in fact, I love their tagline, which basically means that it's The Conversation, academic rigor with journalistic flair. Another observation from our This Is Journalism hashtag is greater depth, right? So new initiatives are being created to provide deep coverage and expertise in specialized areas of public importance. Often these are nonprofit cooperative efforts from universities or from foundations, hoping to fill that void created by cuts in financial cuts that's happening in traditional newsrooms. So in this example is Chalkbeat, right? So somebody tweeted, "This is journalism because the National Education News Network, Chalkbeat, helps people make the decisions they need to improve our world." Other examples that was submitted that provides greater depth that's being supported by either foundations or a nonprofit organization is the Marshall Project. And the Marshall Project is a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that provides high-quality journalism about the American criminal justice system and to amplify the national conversations about the system's failings. And then finally, there's the Juvenile Justice Information Exchange as well, that ensures that full-time, high-qualified professional journalists are covering the juvenile justice issues on a day-to-day basis. So another observation I wanted to point out too is all this idea of ubiquitous and immediate, right? So Catherine again tweeted, "This is journalism because this is how we can get the full picture. Syria conflict 4 years on, share their story." So the Guardian Witness had an opportunity to, of course, gather a lot of the stories and resources that to help tell the story of what's happening in Syria for the last 4 years. So to me, this ubiquitous and immediate opportunity kind of serves the same traditional role of journalism that's been around for years in terms of bearing witness, right? So cell phones, security videos, dashboard cameras, body cameras, and other technologies are expanding this function exponentially, and it raises significant issues of truth and verification. Examples of that is France 24's The Observer, and also there's a website called Video Volunteers that empowers marginalized communities to produce stories, take action, and devise solutions. So the redefinition of journalism must include a re-examination of these standards of ethics and responsibilities required for both professionals and also for amateurs. So we believe that the examples that we just cited achieve what the American Press Institute says is the purpose of journalism, which is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decision about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. So I want to be able to continue the conversation here, right, with the This Is Journalism hashtag. And I think since we have a few minutes left, I was going to do a little exercise, but I think we're going to need to move forward to perhaps take some questions or comments. I would love to actually not just have questions, but really more about a conversation within this group. So as promised, I can tweet this as well right now. The landing page for the What is Journalism is on that bit.ly link, bit.ly/thisisj, and the report that came out from our initial observation and initial analysis is at bit.ly/whatisj SOJC report. Or you can just look at it from the tweet. All right, I think we have about six minutes for conversations. Anybody? Oh, and we do have microphones. You guys have been in these panels and already, so you guys know the rules for the mic.
Hi, my name is Lonneke. I'm from the Netherlands, from a platform called One World, and I find your conversation really interesting. What I wonder is, we all talk about engagement and participation of the audience, but on the other hand, participation is requested, but the audience is not willing to pay anymore, it seems, for the usage of media, of usage of information. So how do you bring those two things together? I mean, is there a business model for all the examples you mentioned?
I think there's a couple of them, right? In terms of the more funded by nonprofit organizations and foundations, and there are some strong experiments that's happening. And that's always a great question, because what is the business model? And I think there's opportunities for that in terms of crowdfunding, right? Especially if it's really connected within the community. Is there an opportunity for local communities to be able to put together their resources and actually have an opportunity to engage with the public? But you said you were from the Netherlands, so it's curious that wasn't there one business model that came out? I forgot what the news organization was, where they were essentially crowdfunding individual journalists, right? In terms of being able to support the reporters themselves. I'd be curious of that model, how that might be applied with some of these projects. I mean, in some ways also, the funding might also occur because of the collaboration that we would want to instill within that. So, whether it's just, I think in some of the examples I showed, it is that collaboration that could be key. That could be the collaboration with the public, as well as collaboration that are funded resources. I know I probably dodged that question, but.
Hi there. Hi.
Oh.
There's some great examples of sites in general and means of engaging. Things like the Syria story or the Rebuilding Haiti. Can you think of, or would you shout out or point out any in particular good examples of engagement where it's two-way, either between journalists crowdsourcing information and dealing with that input, or people dealing directly with governments for the feedback?
Yeah, I think Oakland Voices is a good example of that collaboration, that two-way collaboration, because it is an opportunity where the journalists are actually within the communities, actually training the community to tell their story and to really elevate the levels of accuracy and trust within the community and also the news organization. Now, whether the question is, does it have meaningful impact within the government of Oakland or within the city of Oakland, I think that's a great question, and I would love to explore that as well. Oakland Voices was actually a project that Journalism That Matters, which is the executive director of is Peggy Holman, and I can certainly connect you with her or ask her directly about what's happening in that community.
Hello, my name is Gunther. I'm from Austria, Vienna. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Some of the examples you presented, I have known some I will definitely check out. I have a question. Do you still believe, I know that your J School in Oregon also is famous for its, let's say, traditional approach of storytelling. Do you think there is a future for, let's say, this long readers, long articles, long-term traditional US storytelling in a way? Thank you.
So, is there a future in long-form storytelling? I said absolutely. I think whether it's presented in a beautiful interactive way like Snowfall is one point of view. Whether it's a long story that I'm going to read on the Kindle single is another beautiful way to engage with a long-form story. Or, as I mentioned in one of the examples, the long-form storytelling of documentary films is just yet another intersection of how to integrate compelling storytelling in long form to be able to move people to action. So yeah, I think the way we consume long form is certainly evolving. Number of years, the whole, I mentioned Serial, the audio podcast from This American Life, I think is a great example of long form storytelling, and it's taking advantage of how people consume media, right? It's what we're calling the media moment. Is like the media moment is whether it's bite size because I'm carrying my phone and I'm waiting in a queue for coffee. That's a bite size consumption of media, of news. But there's also longer forms where I'm riding my bike or I'm on a subway, and those are opportunities for yet longer form stories. Or I'm in bed and I really just want to get away and unplug, right? So there's whether there's a future in long-form storytelling, absolutely, because there's opportunities for longer-form media consumption in our media lives. Hello.
Hello. You said something earlier, which I think most people in this room would probably agree with, which I'm going to disagree with.
All right.
I think journalism has always been interactive. I think that what's changed is it used to be that a journalist wrote a piece and put it in the newspaper, and that's where the journalist's interaction stopped. You know, you and I sitting in a cafe could get into a really heated argument 300 years ago over something in the newspaper. And we did do that, right? Well, we didn't, but you know, those of us, you know. And I guess I wonder if actually the crisis around how do we interact and engage our users and do all this and this and this, how does that actually reduce the potential impact? You know, is it possible that creates so much noise, so much appearance of interaction that it actually, nobody really knows what their role is? You know, like journalists think, oh, I'm constantly adapting the story.
Right. So, and this is the last question, I know. Oh, 10 more minutes? Oh, okay. So if I'm understanding right, I think the question is, or the challenge is the fact that, you know, how do we focus from the media smog, the data smog that's happening on the internet? And you're absolutely right. I think there is a way to, there's a potential of confusion and also just taking it all in. There's there's two trends that's happening right now to actually clean that that media consumption a bit, and one of them I'm really concerned with. Right, one of them is the fact that people are creating their own Twitter lists or are joining Facebook groups or only following people of their like minds. And I think, so the idea of, you know, filtering their media consumption based on people like themselves is extremely dangerous, because we are no longer having that open dialogue, that debate, the discourse that we need to really conduct ourselves in a democracy. So the more that all we do is listen to the echo chamber, or in some ways the empty chamber, because no longer people are participating. But the more that we're participating in our own echo chamber and believe that our beliefs is the only one way, then we create a sense of you know, the danger of losing that democracy. So I answered your question mainly with and somewhat of an agreement, like we need to find a way to filter the news so that it's democratic. And so to answer, to yet avoid another answer to your question, because I do agree. I mean, I think there is a lot of noise out there, and I think curation is another opportunity to identify the news and information that's important to you. And that's why I think, you know, sites like Nextdoor that I mentioned, right, whereas they're getting their news around their community, that becomes in essence a digital gathering place of their community, of their neighborhood. But I would take the next step, that I think what's important to advancing and making a stronger democracy is that we actually do need to continue to have face-to-face convenings. So this you know, opportunity that we have to engage with others because of our digital tools should really only be a supplement to the importance of actually gathering within the same physical environment. So that's why one of the beliefs, that's what I love about documentary films, right? Because there's an opportunity there as you're watching within the big screen, I was gonna say silver screen, the big screen, to actually be within the same environment. And perhaps maybe use that film as a catalyst to actually have a dialogue and a conversation within your community. And that's not just the community of geography, right? I think it really is, there needs to be a community of interest that can get people together. I don't know if I answered your question. That's right, it's all about discussion and a conversation, which reminds me, If you want to continue the conversation, please tweet. And you know, it's probably a challenge, right? In the next couple days, if we see something, say something, or tweet something. And you can also, you know, use the hashtag "This is journalism" and you continue that conversation to say, "This is journalism because it's inspiring you to find new forms of journalism, new forms of storytelling, from really unexpected places." Because I think that's where we're heading. Should we answer one more question, or are we good? All right. Thank you very much for coming, guys, and I'll see you around the conference.